Welcome to the Woodchuck Report on this day, November 9th, 2018. This wonderful, glorious, beautiful day. That's a joke. It's actually wet and raining over here in Burlington. So I'm your host, V. Chase, and we've had a hiatus due to the elections in October. And so we're back. And because of the elections, I have a lot of election results. I'd like to, start doing some house cleaning, let you all know what happened and some of the results as I become disorganized. And I got some other things as well for you. So, first things first is I unscrew myself over that I just had. That's what happens when you roll things up. Well, regardless, we already know who won. For U.S. Senate, we all know Bernie Sanders won that handedly, 67% of the votes. How did that, there we go. Apologize for that. I mean, I had it backwards. So, Bernie Sanders, independent caucuses with the Democrats, 183,416 votes, percentage-wise, 67.4%. The runner-up, not that it really matters, but for informational sake, Lawrence Zupan, Republican, 74,635 with 27.4% of the votes, and all others, including Brad Peacock, Russell Obast, Edward Gilbert, Folosad Abdullah, I'm going to have to get that one next time, John Svitavsky, Reed Kane, and Bruce Busa all come in to top out the bottom of the pack. And then the U.S. House at large, without much of a shock, Peter Welch, Democrat, winning it, 69.3% of the vote. He's the runner-up. Again, not that it matters, but Anya Tinio, who I believe held a relatively good vote, especially the fact that I didn't hear anything about her from her. But Republican, 70,690 votes, 26.0%, and Chris Erickson and Laura Potter rounding up the extras. So, I'm really gonna have to stop printing stuff double-sided. It's throwing me off. Now to more local, extreme local. Governor Phil Scott won his re-election. Republicans, 55.4%. Christine Hillcrist, Democrat, 40.4%. And rounding off, Trevor Barlow, Charles Laramie, Chris Erickson, rounding off and M. Payton, rounding off the rest of the percentage. Lieutenant Governor David Zuckerman won his re-election, progressive, 58.5% of the vote. Don Turner, Republican, came in second with 40% of the vote. And then Murray Nkrumah, as well as, and she rounded off the third one with 1.5%. Nope, the math actually adds up this time. State Senate, Addison, Hardy, Democrat, 28%, Bray, Democrat, 28%. For Bennington County, sorry, these are counties. Bennington, Sears, 46%, Campion with 42%, Caledonia, Kitchell, and Bennington with no percentages there. But Chin County, Ash, Ingram, Sorokin, Baruth, Pearson, Leon, Starr, and Rogers, all winning out on that. Grand Isle, Mazza, Lamoille, Westman, Orange County, McDonald, Rutland, Cullimore, Hooker, McNeil, winning. Washington County, Cummings, Polina, Perchlick, Windham County, Balint, and White, and then Windsor County, Clarkson, Nitka, and McCormick. The State House, Addison Rutland was Norris, Bennington Rutland, Sullivan, Caledonia, Washington, Tull, Essex, Caledonia, Orleans is Lefebvre. I can never pronounce that name right. I apologize to, I believe it's him. With Allen also for coming in next. Essex, Caledonia is Quimby. Grand Isle, Chittenden is Johnson and Morgan. Lamoille, Washington is Yakovony, Pat. And then Orange, Caledonia is Conquest and Parsons. And also, correction, I forgot Wilson. So Addison Rutland is Norris and Wilson. Then Orleans, Caledonia is young and strong, and I believe I missed Jingling on top of for Essex Orleans. Again, it's double-sided. I apologize for not remembering that each and every single time. So Secretary of State, Jim Condo's won, 66.8%, with Brooke Page coming in second, 29.5%, with Mary Alice Herbert with the 3.6 round-off. The auditor was Doug Hoffer, Democrat, 61.8%, Richard Kenyon, Republican, 34.0%, and Marina Brown, which I believe that's Liberty. I'm not actually sure what LU is, but I believe LU is Liberty Union with 4.2%. Then we have Treasurer Beth Pierce, Democrat, 67.7%, and Richard Morton, Republican, 32.3%. And that should account for all 100% of the voting of the 275 precincts, approximately 265,127 votes, which is very disheartening, since it's approximately 625,000 Vermonters. So take out about 25% for the under 18 vote. Still not a very large number. Now, I'm going to go on to libertarians in general. This is straight from the libertarian website, not website, but email that I received. So they like to do a round-off of the National Party and what's been going on nationally. Some rather impressive and disheartening, but still impressive votes. I'm going to read this straight off the email so I don't get anything wrong here. So, the November 6th election brought several significant victories for the Libertarian Party, including winning local races for public office in Florida, Kentucky, Minnesota, and Tennessee. And even some states without a winning candidate, Libertarian vote totals were high enough to secure the party's ballot access for future elections in Indiana, Massachusetts, New York, Oklahoma, Wyoming, and the District of Columbia, which will allow future candidates to focus on their campaigns rather than the costly and painstaking process of petition qualification. So Libertarian-leaning ballot initiatives also passed in multiple states, including medical marijuana in Missouri and Utah, and recreational marijuana in Michigan. Cole Ebo, chair of the Libertarian Party of Tennessee, won his race for the Carthage City Council on a platform of transparency, fiscal responsibility, and rigorous questioning of standard political assumptions. There's a quote by him, "I will always stand on principle above all," end quote. So, 3 Libertarians in Minnesota won their city council races, including Vince Workman in Burnsville, Olga Parsons in Crystal, and Nick Roll in Plymouth. Vince Workman in Burnsville, Olga Parsons in Crystal, and Nick Roll in Plymouth. Again, that's in Minnesota. 4 Libertarians in Indiana were also elected to public office, with Cheryl Heckox winning for Greensfolk Township Advisor and Dean Hartley for Franklin Township Board, both winning top 3 positions, as well as 2 other candidates running unopposed. Terry Kaufman for Liberty Township Board and Jamie Owens for Liberty Township Trustee. Libertarian Shannon Denniston won her race for Montgomery County Magistrate in Kentucky. In Florida, Libertarian Sean Elliott was elected to the Indian River Soil and Water Conservation District 1 with 68% of the vote. Very impressive indeed, actually. In South Carolina, Artie Buxton won his race for school board in District 1 with 67% of the vote. Again, very impressive number. And some heartbreaking near misses. We have Bethany Baldus barely lost by only 53 votes in her race to upset Republican incumbent David Miller in Wyoming State House District 55. Before the absentee ballots were counted, she had been leading by 194 votes. And this goes on to say this can be a recount. However, it's possible that this outcome could change. Her near win was aided by a campaign strategy devised by Libertarian Party campaigns advisor Apollo Pazel, who brought Baldus from door to door on crutches in her district despite her recent leg injury. They campaigned together with a team of 6 volunteers, knocking on every door in the district, a total of 3 times each. Obviously, the hard working paid off. So, any of you future candidates, door knocking works. An advice I might take on myself. Oklahoma, which has some of the strictest ballot access laws in the country, has historically made it a difficult state for a libertarian in past elections. Fortunately, Libertarian John Uter won nearly 25% of the vote in this race for Oklahoma auditor and inspector, which secures Libertarian Party ballot access until 2022. So taxpayers in Oklahoma should have assurance that their state and local taxes are accounted for, end quote, was his campaign. In New York, as some of you may know, Libertarian Larry Sharpe received an unprecedented 89,232 votes for governor, far in excess of the 50,000 needed to assure Libertarian Party ballot access in New York for the next 4 years. Sharpe, who ran on an active campaign with appearances throughout news media and interviews on television and radio. And in 2016, Sharpe was also only 32 votes short of being selected as the Libertarian Party's vice presidential candidate at the National Convention. So Richard Brubaker, running for U.S. House from Wyoming, received enough votes to retain Libertarian Party ballot access for the state. Ballot access has also been assured until 2020 in Washington, D.C., thanks to the votes total in Joseph Bishop Henchman's race for Attorney General and his spouse, Ethan Bishop Henchman's race for council chair. Mark Rutherford assured Indiana ballot access until 2022 with his race for Secretary of State. And in Massachusetts, Daniel Fishman has assured ballot access for 2 more years in his race for auditor. And then it goes on to more party stuff, which is unnecessary to today's discussion. But that's what's been going on lately with the Libertarian Party, both nationally and local. So some pretty impressive things, especially all those ballot access that are assured for 2020, and 2022. And that's a big thing because many states do have political party laws, which if a party doesn't receive enough votes, such and such, then they are essentially delisted. So, congratulations to all the Libertarians who did, and heartfelt for all those near misses. Better luck next time, but rest assured, those ballot access will be is much appreciated. All right. So now to the on-topic / off-topic of government spending, revenue, and debt. In case of those of you who lived on a rock and haven't been paying attention, the Democrats took the House, while the Republicans kept and furthered their Senate majority in the Senate. So what does that mean in terms of gridlock, spending, all sorts of government function? Well, it means that both parties now have to talk. The Senate can no longer come up with a bill and have more or less it rammed through the House. And vice versa, the Democrats can't come up with a bill and have it rammed through the Senate. So would that be more gridlock? Undoubtedly so, since the two parties can't seem to talk to each other without throwing some jabs at each other. But we shall see. As the saying goes, time will tell. So my big topic for today is the history of U.S. government spending, and this is history of U.S. government spending, revenue, and debt from 1790 through approximately through 2015. Of course, being 4 years later, this has been increased, if not worsened. So it's a lot of information, and obviously I'm on a time limit, so I'll try to go through some things, and I actually might make this a two-parter depending on how much I get through, because I actually have data all the way from 1790 to 2015. So, onto it, we have, first thing is the federal government did not have the power to tax incomes. So the question is, how was it funded before the income tax? And I know many libertarians I see on my social media say this all the time, before income tax, how was the government funding itself? Ban income tax, we need to get rid of income tax, such and such. Well, let's look at some of the numbers. So today's national debt is big by historical standards, but it has been bigger. Remember, this is from 1790 to 2015. So when was the country's deepest debt and how long did it take to pay back? Those are some of the things we'll be going, and where's all the extra money coming and going from? So from the time it was funded until relatively recently, 2015, the U.S. government has spent approximately 3% of the GDP each year. So that was his debt. Today, the government spends roughly 20% of GDP per year. Sorry, that was spending. So we used to do 3% spending. Now we're at 20%. And if I do a quick math, we're approximately 22% currently, which you see after the next big budget fight. So a look throughout the history of U.S. government financings. We're going to reveal some surprising facts. And as I go down through, we'll see how the debt has evolved since 1790 through approximately 2015. And we can more or less not really need to extrapolate since we're in 2018 right now. So there are many ways of looking at the government debt, but generally speaking, it's most commonly measured as a percentage of GDP. So there's a chart, which I would eventually have thrown up on the, on the web somewhere, so you can actually look at this. But as for now, this is all words. So debt today was approximately 100% of GDP, and debt in 1946 was 118% of GDP. So currently the U.S. debt stands at about 18 trillion. This is as of 2015. As of 2018, it's 21 trillion. So, which is many times more than the historical average, though it has not been the highest in our history. To fund World War II effort, we racked up a debt to GDP, which peaked at 118% of GDP. So during the World War II, we ran debt up to 118% of GDP. So pre-1980, debt has tended to rise in times of need, and then it gets paid back. Key term was paid back. So prior to 1980, the U.S. had undergone only 5 brief periods of rising debt levels, 4 times to finance major wars and once to stimulate the economy during the Great Depression. So post-1980, rising debt has become the norm. For those of you who are Reagan fans, Reagan. The steep decline, which you'll see in the graph, coincides almost exactly with the Ronald Reagan, George H.W. Bush era, Daddy Bush. And at first glance, it seems obvious that the economic policies were to blame, but this article goes on to explain, however, that there's more important turning points that explain the rising debt. So until the mid-1900s, annual spending was consistently about 3% GDP. Again, more graphs I have to show up. I can't really show you right now because it's on paper. But aside from spikes during the wartime and the Great Depression, government spending was remarkably stable throughout most of the U.S. history. From the country's founding until 1930, annual spending fluctuated around 3% of GDP, give or take a percentage or two. So comparatively, today's spending looks absurd, only because since 1980, government spending has averaged approximately 20% of GDP. Now, breaking down spending, Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid did not exist prior to the mid-1900s. FDR was the one who helped create Social Security and Medicare and all that, post the New Deal and all sorts of all that jazz and fun. Today, this all accounts for approximately over half of government spending. But on the other hand, the interest expense is currently about average by historical standards. Although the amount of debt is high, the interest rates on that very debt itself is relatively low. So before 1930s, the government spent 3/4 of its money on just 2 things, which was defense and interest on debt. The interest on debt was mostly to finance defense spending. So in other words, 3/4 was on defense spending. All of the government's non-defense related spending amounted to less than 1% of GDP. Now remember, this is prior to 1930. So while U.S. government spending has certainly undergone big changes, even more dramatic is the evolution of government revenue. This gets into taxes. So tax spiked during World War II, and since then never really came back down. So the spending during World War II was financed with half debt and half with tax increases. And by 1940, the U.S. took in approximately $7 billion in tax revenue. By 1945, its revenue had ballooned up to $45 billion. And then after the war, spending fell off sharply, but since the U.S. needed to pay back all the money it had borrowed, interest payments, the taxes did not come back down. and they have remained at that relative level more or less the same ever since. So why are taxes high? Because we borrowed a lot of money and decided never to. It was a good idea to keep the taxes high. So looking at the revenue breakdown, you can kind of see how things you can appreciate the dramatic changes in things. So in 1910, the government's revenue looked much like it did in the time of George Washington. 3% of GDP earned primarily through tariffs. There's that word again. If you watch any of their previous shows, you would probably get the feeling of my disdain for tariffs. But nonetheless, prior to 1910, we earned most of our money through tariffs. By 1930, the government was claiming away twice as much money and through entirely different means. But anyone who was hoping that these 1930 taxes would return to normal was in a rush for a rude awakening. A decade later, World War II. So for most of the history, government revenue was through passive means, which again, tariffs, excise taxes, and such. So the government raised money through a combination of tariffs, as I just said, excise tax on tobacco and alcohol. We all know how that worked out. Sales of frontier land and such. And at different points, each of the three ended up becoming the number one revenue. So most of our history was tariffs, taxes on consumption, which is what excise tax is, and real estate. So today, income and Social Security tax make up approximately 80% of government revenue, and taxes on corporate income account for an additional 11%. And even now, it goes on to say it's very kind of hard to think how we got about without income or Social Security taxes or any such, but we did. Although we taxed ourselves heavily on pretty much everything else. So the corporate tax was not implemented until 1909, and the income tax was not until 1913. Now there's another discussion of how income tax was perceived, and I'll go through that on a different show because it's actually rather interesting. I got through that. It was actually not a lot as I was doing. It doesn't help if I don't have to show you the graphs, which is my own fault for not putting in, but I'll have that on the web hopefully sometime in the near future, and I'll go over that so that you can actually see the actual data and the physical numbers, and so you can see all the charts and graphs, because it's very interesting to see our government spending, how it has come about from 1790 to 2015, and you can even add in the current 2016, 17, and 18 years. So I know I have approximately 10 minutes, and I was going to go into U.S. work. You know what? I got 10 minutes, and I don't have the signal. So my last article would be for U.S. workers and how real wages have barely budged in decades. Now, in order to understand what real wages are, you have to know the difference between real wage, nominal wages, and inflation. So, and I know a lot of people are probably thinking wages have gone up. Yes, but those wages are what is called nominal wages. And real wage tends to account for inflation, cost of inflation, and such things. So, as economists far greater and smarter than I am have said multiple times that the real wage, the nominal wages adjusted for inflation, have actually not gone up. In some cases, it's actually gone down. So, in real terms, you are poorer now than you were back then. The numbers are higher, but it doesn't count for inflation. So, on the face of it, most Americans, on the face of it, U.S. unemployment rate is low, approximately 3.9% as of July, but I believe it dropped down to approximately 3.6% as of, last time I checked it, which would be earlier this week. And the nation's private sector employees have been adding jobs for 101 straight months. This article is approximately 3 months old, FYI. So 19.5 million since the Great Recession-related cuts finally abated in early 2010, and 1.5 million jobs since the beginning of the year. But despite the strong labor market, wage growth has lagged economists' expectations. In fact, despite the ups and downs of the past several decades, the real average wage, which is, as I said, the wage after accounting for inflation, has about the same purchasing power as it did 40 years ago. So we're in 2018, in case you were wondering. So 40 years ago, now I gotta do math in my head, would be 1978. So, and what wage gains there have been have mostly flowed to the highest paid tiers of workers, which some of you say that is a Bernie scale. Oh, I'm getting a timer. Ooh, the 3-minute mark. So where am I? Sorry, got thrown off there. So, this one actually has a chart. So this chart is, I'm going to read off this chart. Average hourly wages in the U.S., which is seasonally adjusted. Now it starts at 1964, and the current dollar-wise, if we kept a constant $18, you would have been making approximately $20.27, 1964. At that time, the wage was $2.50 in them terms. So, it's saying the constant wage the real wage has more or less stayed flat. And if you adjusted it all the way through, now it should be $22.65. Obviously, most of us aren't making $22.65. So what is that saying? It's saying the 1964 money, adjusted for inflation now, would be worth $22.65. Power inflation. So there's a huge disconnect between job market and workers' paycheck, which has fueled much of the recent activism in states and cities, accounting for the rising minimum wages, and has become a factor in at least some of this year's congressional campaigns, as those who are paying attention. So I will actually stop it there so we can take more time to talk about this and go into much more detail, since I'm getting the 1-minute mark. So with uno minute, or Ika Venjong, I will say, cut off, I say, have a great night. For those of you libertarians who ran a campaign and won, I thank you. For those who ran and missed or did not win, I still thank you again. And we got to keep liberty strong and keep it going. For those of you who secured ballot access for the 2020 and the 2022 election cycles, thank you. I'm sure I know I can't praise you all enough. You were doing something I myself did not do this election time. And so with that, I would say cut off. Have a good night. Enjoy the weather, despite the wet and rainness, and don't do anything I wouldn't do.